Most people think of a blackout as a nuisance, a temporary inconvenience, something that lasts a few hours, maybe overnight, and then life goes back to normal. That assumption is not just wrong. In specific, predictable circumstances, it is the assumption that gets people hurt. What almost nobody understands before it happens is this: the danger during an extended blackout does not usually come from the darkness itself. It comes from the things already inside your home. The ordinary objects you have lived with for years, items you trust without thinking, tools you reach for automatically, that transform into something genuinely hazardous the moment the power goes out and stays out. Not hypothetically. Not in rare edge cases. In patterns that emergency agencies document after every major outage event in this country. This is not about extreme scenarios. This is about what actually happens in American homes during the first 24 to 72 hours of a blackout. And once you understand the mechanisms behind what goes wrong, you will never look at certain objects in your house the same way again. There are 10 of them worth your attention right now. 10 ordinary, trusted things that change character when the grid goes dark. We are going to count them down from the least immediately dangerous to the one that emergency professionals point to most consistently as the leading cause of preventable tragedy during extended power loss. By the time we reach number 1, the way you think about your home during a crisis will have shifted completely. Let us start at 10. Number 10 is sitting in your freezer right now, and you probably feel very good about it. Most households that think about emergency preparedness at all think first about their freezer. They fill it up. They stock it with meat, with frozen meals, with bags of vegetables, and they feel a quiet sense of security knowing that inventory is there. And for the first several hours of a blackout, that instinct is actually correct. The freezer does its job. A full freezer, kept closed, will hold food at a safe temperature for approximately 48 hours after power loss. A half-full freezer loses that margin and drops to around 24 hours. These are the figures from the United States Department of Agriculture, and they represent the best-case scenario, which means the door stays closed throughout and the ambient temperature in the kitchen is not extreme. Here is where the danger begins, and it is more subtle than most people expect. The danger is not the spoiled food you can smell. It is the spoiled food you cannot detect at all. The USDA and the FDA draw a firm distinction between two categories of bacteria. Spoilage bacteria are the ones that cause food to look wrong and smell wrong. They produce the sour odors, the visible slime, the discoloration that tells you something has gone bad. Those bacteria are unpleasant, but they are actually less dangerous because they give you a signal. The far more serious category is pathogenic bacteria. These are organisms like Salmonella, E. coli, and Clostridium perfringens. They grow in the exact same temperature window, above 40 degrees Fahrenheit, but they produce no visible change, no smell, no taste alteration whatsoever. Food contaminated with them looks completely normal. It may smell fine. A taste test would tell you nothing. According to the CDC, 1 in 6 Americans experiences a foodborne illness in a given year, with about 128,000 requiring hospitalization. A significant fraction of those cases are tied to food that no one would have guessed was dangerous. The mistake almost every family makes during a blackout is this: they open the freezer repeatedly to check on things, to retrieve individual items, to assess the situation. Each time that door opens, warm air floods in and accelerates the temperature rise. The 48-hour window is not a guarantee. It is a ceiling that assumes ideal behavior. And when power finally returns, many families look inside, see food that appears intact, and return it to use without understanding that pathogenic bacteria may have been multiplying for hours in a range no thermometer in their home could measure, because most households do not own an appliance thermometer. The USDA's guidance is unambiguous. If perishable foods have been above 40 degrees for 2 hours or more, they should be discarded. Not tasted first. Not assessed by smell. Discarded. The margin for error is narrower than almost anyone assumes. And the cost of getting it wrong is not a stomachache. For children, the elderly, or anyone immunocompromised, it can be genuinely serious. The fix is not complicated. An appliance thermometer inside the freezer costs almost nothing and tells you exactly what the temperature reached and for how long. But most homes do not have one. That gap between what feels prepared and what is actually prepared is the recurring theme you will see across every item on this list. Number 9 is the item most people grab first when the lights go out, and the one that fire agencies most consistently warn against. Candles. There is something instinctive and almost comforting about reaching for a candle during a power outage. They have been a source of light in the dark for all of human history. They feel natural. They feel safe. They produce a warm, familiar glow that genuinely helps with the psychological discomfort of a dark house. And they are sitting in a drawer in the majority of American homes. Which means when the power fails and someone needs light immediately, candles are what comes out. The problem is what happens next. During a blackout, people are navigating unfamiliar darkness. They are stressed. They are distracted. They are setting candles down on surfaces that are not designed for them. Countertops with paper nearby, bookshelves, bedroom nightstands, and then moving to other parts of the house. They fall asleep with candles burning. They forget where they placed them. The National Fire Protection Association has documented this pattern extensively. In a study covering a 5-year period, NFPA estimated that candles caused roughly 7,400 home structure fires per year in the United States, resulting in an average of 90 deaths, 670 injuries, and nearly $291 million in property damage annually. One of the most critical findings in that research is buried in the data. Candles used as a light source in the absence of electrical power represent a disproportionate share of fatal fires. The fires that happen during blackouts are not just more frequent, they are more deadly because response times are slower, because family members may already be disoriented or asleep, and because smoke alarms that are not battery-backed go silent the moment the grid fails. 3 of every 5 candle fires occur when combustible material is too close to the flame. A curtain, a paper towel, a stack of mail on a kitchen table. These are not unusual situations in a house during a stressful blackout night. They are completely ordinary situations that take on catastrophic potential the moment a flame is present. The USFA, FEMA's fire safety arm, makes the guidance explicit. Use flashlights, not candles, during a power outage. Battery-powered LED lighting produces more light, lasts longer, generates no heat, and carries 0 fire risk. Flameless candles with LED technology now exist that closely replicate the appearance and even some of the ambiance of real candles without any of the hazard. These are solutions that exist, are inexpensive, and eliminate the risk entirely. The question is whether your household has made that transition before the grid goes dark, or whether candles remain the default. Number 8 involves a piece of equipment that millions of Americans have purchased specifically for emergencies, something that was bought with the explicit purpose of making a blackout safer. And it becomes one of the most dangerous objects in the vicinity of your home during an extended outage if it is used the way most people use it. The portable generator. The Consumer Product Safety Commission has tracked the data on this for years, and the numbers are stark. Approximately 85 people die in the United States each year from carbon monoxide poisoning caused by gasoline-powered portable generators. That figure comes from a CPSC report covering a decade of incidents. The CDC notes that carbon monoxide poisoning, not just from generators but from all non-fire sources, sends more than 20,000 Americans to emergency rooms annually. Generators are associated with roughly 40% of consumer product-related carbon monoxide deaths. What makes this particularly difficult to understand, until you know the chemistry, is that carbon monoxide is completely undetectable to human senses. It is colorless. It is odorless. It has no taste. It produces no visible smoke. People describe the progression of CO poisoning as feeling like the flu, dizziness, nausea, weakness. And the insidious aspect is that at higher concentrations, The gas can render a person unconscious before they have any opportunity to recognize what is happening. By the time someone in the household realizes something is wrong, it may already be too late to respond effectively. The error that causes most generator-related deaths is not ignorance that generators need to be outdoors. Most people know that. The CPSC data reveals something more alarming. A significant number of fatal CO poisoning events involve generators that were placed outside, but too close to the structure. Doors, windows, vents, and gaps in building envelopes can channel carbon monoxide exhaust back into the living space even when the generator appears to be outdoors. The CPSC's official guidance specifies a minimum of 20 feet from all windows, doors, and vents. 20 feet. Most people running a generator during a storm, at night, in rain, place it just outside the garage door, on the back porch, or next to a window for convenience. These placements can be lethal. After Hurricane Florence in 2018 and the Texas winter storm Uri in 2021, investigators documented generator-related carbon monoxide poisoning events in homes where the generator had been placed what seemed like a reasonable distance outdoors. The physics of CO diffusion near structures don't always behave the way common sense predicts. The safety requirement is not the generator itself. It is the discipline around how and where it is operated. A working carbon monoxide detector inside the home with battery backup, combined with strict placement protocols, transforms a dangerous tool into a genuinely useful one. Without those elements, the generator purchased for safety purposes can become the single most dangerous object in a 2,000 square foot radius of your family. Number 7 is something most people do not think about until day 2 of a blackout, when a different kind of problem begins. Your medications. Roughly half of all American adults take at least one prescription medication. A significant portion of those medications require continuous refrigeration, insulin being the most critical example, but by no means the only one. Certain biologics, liquid antibiotics, some eye drops, various injectable medications, and a range of other pharmaceuticals have temperature stability requirements that a non-functioning refrigerator cannot meet. The FDA and pharmaceutical manufacturers specify storage ranges for temperature-sensitive medications that are narrower than most people realize. Insulin, for example, is typically rated for stability at room temperature for a limited window, often 28 to 30 days once opened and kept below a certain threshold. But during a summer blackout, room temperature in an unventilated home is not 72 degrees. It can climb well above 90 degrees within hours, and at those temperatures, medication degradation can be significant and invisible. Degraded insulin still looks like insulin. It still draws into a syringe the same way. It does not produce an odor or change color, but its effectiveness can be substantially compromised. And for a diabetic who depends on it for basic metabolic function, that degradation is not an inconvenience. It is a medical emergency in slow motion. This is the problem with medication during a blackout that almost no preparedness conversation addresses adequately. The person who needs the medication typically cannot tell it has been compromised. There is no obvious signal. The warning often comes only when the medication fails to perform as expected, at which point the crisis is already underway. For households with family members on critical medications, the blackout plan has to address this explicitly and before it becomes an emergency. Knowing where the nearest medical facility with generator power is located, understanding the medication's specific temperature tolerance, having a plan for ice or a cooler, communicating with the prescribing physician about emergency protocols. These are conversations that should happen before the grid ever fails, not during the second night of a summer outage. Number 6 is one of the most common sources of preventable injury during extended outages, and it happens in a completely predictable way that most families have never considered. The medical literature around extended power outages consistently identifies falls and darkness as a leading cause of injury, particularly among older adults. This is not about the first moments of a blackout, when people are still oriented to their environment This is about hours 12, 18, 24, when people are sleep-deprived, when routines have been disrupted, when children are anxious and adults are exhausted, and when someone gets up at 2 in the morning to find water or use the bathroom in a house where no automatic nightlight has turned on and no phone screen gives orientation. The specific hazard is the domestic environment itself, which most people know so well, they navigate it without thinking under normal conditions. Stairs. Furniture moved slightly from its usual position to accommodate the disruption of the outage. Extension cords laid down temporarily. Objects left on floors. Pet items in unexpected locations. In daylight and with functioning lights, these present no danger. In genuine darkness, with an exhausted, disoriented adult moving quickly, the fall risk is significant. The CDC tracks fall-related injuries extensively, and falls in the home represent one of the leading causes of injury-related emergency room visits and fatalities in the United States, particularly among adults over 65. What the data does not always separate out, clearly, is the contribution of power outage conditions to that overall figure. But trauma departments at hospitals in areas where extended blackouts occurred after major storms consistently report elevated fall-related admissions during the outage period. The solution is straightforward, but requires deliberate setup before the emergency begins. Battery-operated, motion sensor nightlights positioned at stair landings, hallways, and bathroom entrances. A designated flashlight at each person's bedside, not in a drawer somewhere. Not on a charging station that has no power. A household that understands where these lights are and how to access them in complete darkness. These are decisions that take minutes to implement and require no emergency to decide upon. But most homes have not made them. Number 5 is the one that concerns electrical professionals most when they think about what happens the moment power returns, which is the part of a blackout almost nobody prepares for. Most of the attention during a power outage goes toward the first hours of darkness. But in terms of property damage and electrical hazard, one of the most vulnerable moments is not when the lights go out. It is when they come back on. When the electrical grid restores power after an extended outage, the restoration is rarely as smooth, even return to normal voltage. Utility companies describe the phenomenon as an inrush, a sudden surge of electrical current rushing into the distribution system to fill what engineers call the void created by the outage. All of the devices that were switched on when power failed, the televisions, the computers, the kitchen appliances, everything left in its operating position, suddenly receive power simultaneously. That simultaneous demand can cause voltage spikes that exceed the normal operating threshold for sensitive electronics. According to electrical safety experts and insurance analysts, power surges at the moment of restoration are a documented cause of damage to computers, televisions, gaming systems, and appliances. The CPSC notes that appliances and electronics are designed for specific voltage ranges, and increases beyond those ranges can damage or destroy circuit boards and internal components. State Farm, in Consumer Safety Guidance, specifically identifies power restoration after an outage as one of the primary causes of surge damage in residential settings. What makes this particularly costly is that surge damage is not always immediate or obvious. Small surges can degrade electronic components gradually, shortening the life of appliances over time. Larger surges can destroy circuitry instantly, and a device that was functioning perfectly when the outage began may simply not turn on when power returns, with no explanation apparent to the user. The straightforward protection is a quality surge protector on every device that matters, combined with the practice of unplugging sensitive electronics, computers especially, when an outage begins, before power returns. Many households do neither. They have surge protectors that are years past their effective service life. Most surge protectors have a finite joule rating and stop protecting after absorbing their threshold. Or they have never unplugged anything during an outage and simply waited for power to return. The moment of restoration, which feels like relief, is also the moment of maximum electrical risk. Number 4 involves water. which is perhaps the most important resource in any emergency. And the way it becomes a hidden danger during an extended blackout is something that most people discover only after the fact. The connection between electrical power and water, safety, is less intuitive than most other items on this list. But it is real, and it is serious. Municipal water systems, the infrastructure that delivers safe, treated water to the tap in the overwhelming majority of American homes, depend on electrically powered pumping stations to maintain water pressure throughout the distribution network. When those pumping stations lose power or switch to backup generators with limited fuel capacity, several things happen that affect the water coming out of your faucet. Pressure drops in the distribution system are not just an inconvenience. They create conditions that allow contaminants to enter the pipes. In a properly pressurized water system, positive pressure inside the pipes prevents external material from being drawn in. When pressure drops significantly, that protective dynamic reverses. Cracks or joints in aging pipe infrastructure can allow soil, groundwater, and associated contaminants to enter the supply. The EPA and public health authorities have documented this mechanism in connection with major infrastructure events and issue boil water advisories specifically because of it. During extended regional blackouts, the kind that affect not just individual homes, but entire neighborhoods or utility districts, municipalities frequently issue boil water advisories for exactly this reason. But these advisories travel through electronic notification systems, local news broadcasts, and social media, none of which a household without power may be able to access. Families continue drinking tap water throughout a blackout assuming it is safe, because the water appears to be running normally. Appearance provides no information about microbial safety. The practical implication is that a household preparedness plan has to include a separate, stored water supply that does not depend on the municipal system during an emergency, and a battery-powered or hand-crank radio capable of receiving emergency broadcasts when digital channels are unavailable. FEMA's guidance recommends 1 gallon of water per person per day as a baseline, with a minimum 3-day supply, and higher amounts for families in warm climates or with specific medical needs. This stored supply is specifically intended for situations where the safety of tap water during a regional emergency cannot be verified. Number 3 is where the emotional weight of this list sharpens considerably, because this item involves the people in your household who are most vulnerable and least able to self-advocate. Medical equipment that runs on electricity. For the approximately 8 million Americans who depend on home medical devices, oxygen concentrators, home ventilators, suction machines, infusion pumps, electric hospital beds, CPAP and BiPAP machines for sleep apnea, and implanted device chargers for cardiac devices. A power outage is not just an inconvenience. It is a medical timeline that begins the moment the grid fails. FEMA and the Department of Health and Human Services explicitly recognize this as one of the highest risk categories during a blackout, particularly during extended events. The challenge is not that people using these devices do not know their equipment requires power. They do know. The challenge is that the backup systems, battery packs for CPAPs, portable oxygen concentrators with limited battery life, home generators, carry finite durations, and those durations may not span an unexpectedly long outage. After Hurricane Maria devastated Puerto Rico's electrical grid in 2017, researchers documented cases in which patients with home oxygen concentrators and other life-sustaining devices experienced medical emergencies directly attributable to equipment failure from the extended blackout. Puerto Rico's grid outage stretched in some areas for months, the longest major power outage in United States history. The human cost of that extended power loss included deaths tied explicitly to the failure of home medical equipment. The investigative record on that event represents the clearest documentation available of what happens when the connection between electrical power and life-sustaining equipment is severed for longer than backup systems can sustain. The preparation for households with medical equipment users is not optional and not trivial. It involves registering with the local utility company, Most utilities maintain medical priority lists for restoration and can alert affected customers before planned outages. Knowing the exact battery duration of every backup system, having a pre-identified facility with generator power, where the individual can safely shelter during an extended outage, and having a written plan that every adult in the household understands before any crisis begins. Number 2 is the item that becomes dangerous not in a dramatic, sudden way, but slowly, invisibly, and particularly ruthlessly toward the people in your home who cannot tell you something is wrong. Temperature. An unheated home during winter and an uncooled home during summer are not the same emergency, but they share the same essential dynamic. The human body's ability to maintain a safe core temperature depends on the environment, and the environment in a sealed residential structure changes more quickly than most people expect when climate control fails. The 1995 Chicago heat wave is the most extensively studied domestic temperature emergency in American history. That event, which occurred over 5 days in July, resulted in approximately 739 excess deaths in the city of Chicago, the largest single-city heat disaster in modern American records. A significant fraction of those deaths occurred indoors, in private residences, among elderly residents who lived alone, in upper-floor apartments where heat accumulates, and who did not have functional air conditioning or access to cooling. Many of those individuals were found days later. Their neighbors did not know they were in distress. Their families did not know they needed help. The key medical finding from that event and from subsequent research on heat-related illness is that heat exhaustion and heat stroke progress through stages. And the cognitive impairment that comes with elevated core body temperature actively undermines the person's ability to recognize what is happening or call for help. This is not hypothetical. This is documented in medical literature from that event. The person most at risk of heat stroke during an extended summer blackout may be the last person to realize they are in danger. On the cold side, the dynamic is different, but comparably serious. A residential structure without heating during a winter storm loses temperature at a rate that depends on insulation quality, outdoor temperature, and whether household members understand how to retain warmth effectively. During Winter Storm Uri in Texas in February 2021, millions of households lost power for days in conditions well below freezing. The Texas Department of State Health Services ultimately attributed over 200 deaths to the event, with hypothermia and cold-related illness among the leading causes. Many of those deaths occurred not in outdoor conditions, but in inadequately heated homes. The preparedness response to temperature hazard is specific and practical. Know where the nearest designated cooling or warming center is located in your municipality before any summer or winter emergency begins. Have a layered plan. What you will do in the first 6 hours, what you will do if the outage continues to 24 hours, and who you will call at the 48-hour mark. For households with elderly residents, infants, or anyone with cardiovascular or respiratory conditions, temperature is not one concern among many during an extended blackout. It is the primary one. Number 1 is not an object you can point to on a shelf. You cannot buy it at a hardware store. It does not run on batteries, but it is, consistently and across every major documented blackout event in American history, the factor that most reliably separates the households that navigate an extended outage safely from the ones that do not. The absence of a written, practiced, pre-committed household plan. Every item on this list becomes significantly more dangerous when the people in the house have to make decisions about it for the first time in the dark, under stress, while sleep-deprived, with children asking questions, and with no reliable information about when the crisis will end. The generator gets placed too close to the house because no one thought through the placement in advance, and the rain makes moving it inconvenient. The candle gets set on the wrong surface because the safe flashlights are in the back of a drawer somewhere. The medication is left in a failing refrigerator because no one had thought through what to do with it. The family drinks tap water without information because there is no battery-powered radio to receive the boil water advisory. The University of Delaware's Disaster Research Center, one of the oldest and most respected emergency preparedness research institutions in the United States, has produced decades of literature on what determines household resilience during emergencies. The consistent finding is not about which specific supplies a household has. It is about whether decisions have been made before the emergency begins. Families with pre-committed plans, even simple, written ones, consistently outperform households with more supplies, but no framework for using them under pressure. The plan does not need to be long. It needs to answer specific questions. Where are the flashlights? And does every person in the house over the age of 6 know how to find them in complete darkness? Where is the written list of medications that require refrigeration? And what is the protocol if power is out for more than 4 hours? Where is the battery-powered radio? What is the carbon monoxide detector status? And when were its batteries last replaced? Who is the designated point of contact outside the household if family members cannot reach each other? Where is the nearest shelter, cooling center, or warming center? And how will the family get there if a vehicle is needed? These are questions with simple answers. The difficulty is not in answering them. The difficulty is in the moment of a real emergency, when the answers have to come quickly and from memory, and the family that has never asked them realizes that they do not actually know. That gap between the assumption of preparedness and the reality of it is where every item on this list does its damage. The most important step is not buying something. It is sitting down with the people who share your household and working through those questions while the lights are still on. That conversation and the written record it produces is the one preparedness tool that does not require batteries, does not expire, and does not fail when the grid does. The things in your home do not change when the power goes out. What changes is the context around them. And context, it turns out, determines everything. If you found this useful, the follow-up to what we covered today goes one level deeper, and it will probably surprise you. Because what happens during a blackout is one thing, but what happens before one, specifically in your pantry and your long-term food storage, is a different conversation entirely.
The first 3 days,
most families have never had it. The next video is going to walk through exactly what should be on your shelves before a crisis begins. Not just for a 3-day outage, but for the scenarios where resupply takes longer than anyone expected. That is coming next.